Hi, and welcome to our Penn Foster Group podcast. I'm your host, Nicole. Today, we'll be speaking with Cassie Zepich from one of our very special partners, Southern Veterinary Partners. Cassie is the Director of Veterinary Technician Programs. Welcome.
Thank you very much.
So, SVP is a veterinarian owned and operated network of hospitals with over 5,000 employees and has been partnering with Penn Foster for close to 3 years now. So, Cassie, can you give a little more information about SVP and the work you do?
Yes, so we're based out of the Birmingham, Alabama area, but our footprint is national. So we acquire hospitals typically from owners who are looking to retire or to focus more on the medical side of the business and less on the administrative operational tasks. So one of the things that I love about SVP and a big part of the reason why I joined the company is we allow owners to go ahead and continue operating in the same way they have. We don't come in and take over their branding. We don't change their name. We don't go through a process of analyzing the talent they have in the hospitals and then eliminating roles. We really want to make sure we maintain the culture and integrity of that specific hospital and allow them to do what they do best with a lot of back-end administrative support. And that's really where my team comes in. So we partner closely with the medical operations team to make sure that we're building vet tech programs that support our teammates in the hospitals. And that's definitely a huge perk of joining the SVP network, is making sure you get that back-end administrative support. So a portion of what I do really is, identifying what's happening in the veterinary space and how it impacts our veterinary technician talent in our hospitals, and then building programs accordingly. So when we first started our journey with Penn Foster, one of the big questions was, how do we better leverage our hospital support team to deleverage all of the tasks that we put on veterinarians? We know that they're at high risk of burnout, more at risk than the general public for suicide. And so those conversations really centered around, okay, well, if we're trying to free up our veterinarians, what does that look like? And the conversation quickly turned to, well, we need to better leverage our veterinary technicians. The challenge with that is there simply aren't enough vet techs in the industry. So for us, quickly when I stepped into role and started managing our vet tech programs, we discussed that we can't really rely on recruitment solely to really address some of the challenges that we're experiencing in the industry. We have to build talent internally, and that's where our partnership with Penn Foster became really crucial.
I think that's really interesting because I do speak with students a lot and alumni, and that's kind of one of the things that I always hear is that a lot of the people who go into the vet tech field, they always loved animals. They were always interested in veterinary medicine, but they didn't really realize, I guess, the expanse of the different roles, and that being a veterinary technician is a job option. So many people say,
Right.
like, I like animals and I wanted to work with animals, but I never thought that that could be my career. So I think it's really interesting that you point that out. And that recruitment is hard because people don't necessarily know that those, I think those of us maybe who have pets know obviously that those
Right.
positions are there. Figuring out where to start is sometimes the hardest part.
Absolutely.
I think I mentioned earlier, SVP, and you mentioned it's, you guys are owned and operated by veterinarians. You keep all the clinics
Yeah.
kind of status quo in a sense. How do you think that sets you apart from other maybe bigger, more corporate owned clinics and hospitals?
I think so. There are companies that will come in and they will knowingly like riff a portion of your team. It's just kind of to be expected. And so I think what's great about SVP is, my hope when we come in and acquire a hospital is there isn't this underbelly of fear that that's going to happen, that the owner, as they're going through the process of partnering with us, is making it clear to their teams the SVP is a little different in that way, and that our intent is to really buy high performing hospitals and allow them to continue to do what they do best, and to support them. And so I think my hope is, when we do that, that it's well received by folks in the hospitals. And I think it hopefully sets a tone for a more positive experience. I think anytime you're acquired, there's going to be that change management cycle, and there will be the fear of the unknown. But my hope is that um, people look at SVP and know they're in good hands, and that there's not nearly as much to fear as there could be with some of the other larger competitors in the space.
Oh, for sure. And I think, that's something we've all like anybody who works in some sort of like a corporate sphere has kind of
Yes.
gone through that where, management changes, the overhead changes, and you get that little bit of fear, like, oh,
Right.
geez, what's going to come for me? But I think particularly in a field such as veterinary medicine, where it doesn't just affect the staff necessarily, that that fear, that change in atmosphere and dynamic, it doesn't just affect, that little enclosed circle. It kind of then spreads out and affects clients, both,
Yes.
parents and the animals alike. So I think that really creates a nice continuity of care in the sense that, that stability is still there.
Absolutely. Yeah, because we hear from clients a lot. There are certain clients that really want to make sure they're seeing the same care team
Mhm.
every time they come in with their pet. They wanna know the receptionist who's checking them in at the front desk. They wanna know the technician and the doctor who are administering care to their pets, right? Their pets are usually an extension of the family, and so
I definitely do that myself, when I
yeah.
take my dog in, it gives you a little bit of just a calm sense of reassurance when you're seeing the same person. It's like when you go to
Yes.
your own doctor,
Absolutely.
they know your history, they know your pet's history, and that kind of gives you, especially I think, post pandemic where so many people were adopting animals,
Yeah.
and a lot of them have these tumultuous backgrounds, and so even for them to have that continuity, I think is really helpful. So I personally love that.
Yes. Yeah, I think it's so important, and, I think it's really necessary for us to remember that we may be dealing with pets, but we are also always dealing with the client. And the client is going to have similar expectations and behaviors when they come in for a veterinary exam as they would going and getting their own care, and oftentimes maybe even more particular, um, kind of
I
set
think
of
we definitely
criteria, right? Like, you hear from people that they're like, "I haven't been to the doctor in 30 years, but my pet goes to their exam every 6 months," right? So, there's this level of, "You better take care of my baby better than you take care of me," and, that is amazing when we get clients who are that compliant, and it's a high expectation and high bar that our teams have to meet.
That's great. So, what was it that, I know you kind of mentioned this, but I'd like to go back to it, that made SVP decide to implement an internal training program for employees? I know you mentioned, the outreach doesn't necessarily, or, sorry, I'm at a loss for the right word right now
Okay.
suddenly. But it's hard to do that, like, recruitment.
Yeah.
So, what kind of, what was the light bulb that went off that kind of said, we need to do this internally?
Honestly, it's looking at the numbers. Recruiting is absolutely an important piece. We will always recruit veterinary technicians. We need them, especially in markets that can be harder to fill or in areas that have very stringent practice acts, based on the state that they're in. So recruiting will always absolutely be an important facet, but if we only rely on recruitment alone, we will never be fully staffed as an industry. And so we as an industry, I think, really need to look at the future and say, what does the future look like? And as we kind of look to human healthcare as an example, back in the early 80s, they went through a staffing crisis as an industry as well, right? And they were having difficulty making sure they had enough practitioners, especially in rural communities. And so that's when the topic of nurse practitioners, physician's assistants really came to light in a more broad scale. We're going through some of those same trends right now. We're just, roughly 40 years behind. So I think it was not only looking at our industry, but looking at the most similar industry, human health care, to see what did they do when they went through the same crisis. Well, they created additional practitioners with that mid-level role, and then they built up their registered nurse pipeline. And so we're needing to really kind of do something very similar to that as an industry, but with a lot of nuances thrown in.
I think that's fascinating because I didn't really think about it in terms of how it works in parallel in a sense. I mean, obviously different timeline, but it kind of mirrors, human health care. And I didn't obviously, I knew about the struggles in the industry and trying to find, qualified, you know, veterinary technicians and veterinarians themselves, but I didn't think about it in terms of how it so closely like follows that same
Yes.
pattern, but that is very true. And in a way, I guess it's a good thing that it's a little bit further behind and that you have something, a model to kind of bounce off of and get ideas from.
Yes, absolutely. I think one of the things that probably puts us at a bit of a disadvantage as an industry when you compare us to human healthcare had, much more established guidelines from one state to the next. I think at the time that they were going through this cycle, whereas in the veterinary technician space, there's so many conversations happening right now about what do we even call a vet tech? Are we veterinary nurses? Are we veterinary technicians? And then you cross state lines. You could be a CVT, an LVT, an LVMT, or an RVT. And, the number of continuing education hours you're required to complete within each credentialing cycle varies dramatically, if it's even required. What you can legally do in the hospital as a technician versus a non-credentialed support member also dramatically varies from one state to the next. And then you have some states that just aren't even regulated. So I think we're definitely kind of in a interesting transitional phase of really trying to, as an industry, get our ducks in a row and all get on the same page so we can further what we do.
Absolutely. So, how did SVP come to choose Penn Foster as its partner for employee training, and what were the kind of the key factors that made Penn Foster stand out as the top choice?
So one of the things is when we really look at our teammate population, there are so many folks who work full time and they need to be able to work to survive, right? Like they have families and bills. And so relying on programs that would require them to work fewer hours for many of our teammates is just not an option. And so really it was meeting the people who work for us and who allow us to do what we do well. We wanted to invest in them and invest in them in a way that met them where they're at. So if you need to be able to work full time and go to school, what does that look like? Well, it's probably online learning, right? And there are few programs across the country that offer online learning programs. A few programs are hybrid, but very few of them really offer truly like full distance learning program curriculum. And so Penn Foster definitely stood out because we could administer the program at a large scale nationally, allow teammates to opt in a way that works for them. Obviously they have certain milestones they have to meet in terms of completion for their semester, and have to be completed with the program in a matter of 6 years, but really allowed them to kind of flex their schedule for school according to what's happening in their real life, and then also allowed us to administer education in areas of the country where there simply are no vet tech programs that are at brick and mortar schools. So that can definitely be a challenge. Is certain areas where you find vet tech programs, we may not have locations nearby, and driving to a school becomes a bit of a barrier to access.
That's something I've been hearing more often the more I speak with our vet tech students is that, that is also another common theme in that, obviously there's the element of, I have to work. I can't just stop working to, advance my education, but also a lot of students are in areas where, it's travel time and it's distance to get to a
Yes.
brick and mortar school, and it's just not compatible with everything else people typically have going on in their lives.
Yeah, it's challenging and, I can say as someone who, worked full time, went to school full time, it is really challenging to figure out that scheduling, and I know, um, if I were a bit younger and online learning had been a thing or I had, gone through my educational pathways a little bit later in life, I would have definitely grabbed an opportunity to do online learning. It would have made life so much easier.
Right. It's
'Cause
something I feel like a lot of us look back on now and we're like, oh man, where was that way back? Which I mean,
Right.
it's funny, Foster has been here for so long, but in terms of like the partnerships and stuff, I don't I I guess that kind of leads me on to another question is how do you incorporate or how do you approach your employees with this option? Because sometimes I think, just in talking to students, maybe they don't necessarily know sometimes their employers offer educational assistance or programs that they can do through their employer. So how does that connection get made?
I think for us, it's weaving it in through every facet of the business and making sure that, um, this is very much a cross-functional program, and it's not siloed. So, it's not me and my team saying, "We're administering this program." It's, you know, I'm a partner first and foremost to teammates and secondly to our leadership team, right? So, um, I'm here to serve our organization and to advance work. So I never want to create something in a vacuum, right? So it's really relying on our partners in operations, in our business development team. It's, equipping them with the tools they need to be able to articulate high level bullet points about the program. I don't necessarily need them to know every odd nuanced thing, but I want them to be able to go to an event where they're talking to potential sellers or to vet tech students and let them know what we offer. And so it's really making sure across the board our teams can articulate what is the program, why would you be interested, and what do you need to do to apply. And I think if anything, we've probably done that too well because we've grown so quickly. So it's a good problem to have. Um, but yeah, I think just making sure we're constantly talking about it and constantly educating our hospital teams about this really amazing benefit we offer.
So, I know you mentioned challenges, but were there any specific challenges SVP faced in the early stages of the partnership, and how did you overcome those? Were there any particular like planning phases, like customizing training with Penn Foster?
Yeah, I think anytime you're building a program, to me, the biggest challenge is always the unknown. It's what you don't know to solve for until you're in the thick of it, experiencing it, and looking back and saying, gosh, I really would have done that different had I known what I know now. And I think that's one of the things I love about my job. And that's one of the things that's the most challenging is building in the unknown is a lot different than like taking an existing process and refining it and making it polished and shined. And so when I think back to the early days when we first started building the program, I had stepped in to the role to oversee Vet Tech Vision as a program manager, as kind of like a side project. It was like my hobby project. And our contract had already been signed, and when I started reviewing everything, I said, "Wait, how are we supposed to enroll them?" And the team was like, "We're not sure. Here you go." And so, had I been able to go back and do that, I'd say definitely would have stood up our portal and reporting prior to finalizing like the process of saying, hey, this program is live. Now let's enroll people because we did a lot on the back end to clean up reporting while building our portal and enrolling people and then tweaking reports and whatnot. So um, I don't regret us going the route we did because I think our primary goal at that time was to get people enrolled, let them start taking classes. We'll figure out all the administrative stuff on the back end. But definitely would have loved to had those things stood up a little bit sooner in our process.
That just makes me think of, anytime you kind of like meet with somebody new or start a new position and everybody, oh, you have those little like meetings to kind of, figure out everybody's roles. And it's, do you have any questions? And
Mhm.
it's always like, well, no, because I haven't done anything yet. So I don't necessarily have the questions because I'm not in the thick of it yet. And I feel
Yes,
like that's kind of comfortable in a sense. You have a plan and you have a general idea of things, but until you're actually putting it into practice, it's a little hard to figure out, what the questions are, what the problems are going to be until they're smack dab
absolutely.
in your
Don't know what you don't know till you realize you didn't know it, right? Um, yeah, so I think that's an ever evolving journey of identifying what are the gaps in our process, what kind of feedback do we need to give to the Penn Foster team for how we can continue to improve our partnership to better deliver content to our students.
sure. So, now that we know some of the challenges, what are some of the biggest benefits that you've seen from the partnership?
I think definitely the partnership has allowed us to really like come to the table with these amazing offerings for current and future veterinary technicians that we didn't have before. And so ultimately, that has definitely helped us both recruit and retain, um, either current or future veterinary technician talent. So I'd say that was definitely by and far the biggest win is we see very, very apparent results that tie to those who are enrolled in the program versus those who are not in terms of retention. And definitely have received lots of positive feedback from my cross functional counterparts within SVP saying Vet Tech Vision is such a cool program. When we talk to, you know, teammates, they're so excited. They're talking to their HM, finding out, okay, when I reach my 1 year marker, like, can I enroll that day? So
Oh,
definitely
that sounds
builds a lot of energy and momentum among our hospital teams.
oh, that's great. So, what advice would you give to other veterinary practice owners or managers who are considering implementing an employee training program with Penn Foster or even another partner?
I think building transparency with your students, letting them know what they're signing up for. This is a really great program. It's a great opportunity. And it's not just a simple certificate program, right? This is a degree, it's a college education. And with that comes a lot of work. Um, and so I think creating um, a healthy sense of enthusiasm mixed with like here's the reality of the program. The reality is you're going to need to figure out how you put in your externship hours. The reality is you're going to need to spend 10 to 20 hours a week studying minimum. Um, and so really kind of crystallizing that intent and making sure to create some like time bound call to action for teammates in a program where you can take quite a bit of time to complete it. I think creating some guardrails to allow them to be successful is definitely important.
That's really, really, those are great points, especially because, you want people to be enthusiastic and you want them to be excited about, taking this on. But at the same time, it's a lot of work. That is something we consistently hear about the program is it is very intense. It is
Yes.
tough. It's not a walk in the park.
No, not at
And
all.
so definitely do need to prepare. You want everyone to be excited about it and enthusiastic and look forward to doing this, but you also want them to have realistic expectations too, that it's not going to be a breeze and it's not just going to be something you can do in your free time. You kind of have to create some free time and focus to really do it correctly and properly.
Absolutely. And it's like A and P, that is a really difficult class any way you spin it, right? And so just really kind of reviewing the course content, making sure folks understand what they're signing up for, um, what the time commitment is, how long it could take them to get done. Especially, when you hear associate degree, I think most people easily equate that to 2 years, but they're
Mhm.
often, I think, prone to forgetting that that's 2 years of full time classes. And if you don't log in for a month, you're not really taking full time classes. So, creating that sense of urgency and that um, kind of ability to self-monitor and self-schedule is really important.
And too with the externship, because I mean, obviously it's such a key, important element to the program, but it is something that honestly, when I started here, I didn't even like I was going through the vet tech program and I was looking at the curriculum and it didn't even dawn on me like, duh, you have to do an externship.
Yeah.
And the extent of what some of the externships are, they seem to be the part that most people um really enjoy and really find, I think, the most benefit from out of everything, but
Yes.
it's also it's a lot.
It is a lot, yeah, and, especially for, folks who are working in companion animal clinics, they may not be able to log all of those hours on-site at their home hospital, so, you know, you gotta have a little bit of grit to be able to figure out how do you get that large animal component checked off your list, right? Like, there's a lot that you've gotta do, and so
That was what I was really surprised about. I was like, "Oh my goodness, yeah, they have to do large animals,"
yes.
and I find that stuff very interesting, but I didn't even I think the common, at least in my brain, the common thought is veterinary medicine. You think, family pets, but obviously, large animals need veterinary care too,
Yes.
especially, farm animals. And so you don't necessarily immediately, I think, especially if you're outside of the field like myself, where, that's not where your mind immediately goes to. So it's definitely something to take into consideration
Yeah.
when you're going and looking at the program and considering it seriously.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a commitment and it takes time. And sometimes you have to get creative to find labs that will allow you to check those components or other clinics that will. And so I think, in order to be any student who's, probably working and going to school at the same time, you got to be scrappy. And then you especially have to be scrappy when you're figuring out some of these externship pieces.
Definitely. So one thing I read was that SVP was named one of America's most loved workplaces. In fact, you placed 19th out of 100 companies. So, I mean, I think we can kind of figure it out from here, but in your words, what is it that makes SVP such an exceptional place to work?
Yeah. So what's really exciting, we were 19th last year, we're 22nd this year, but with a bigger pool. And also, we were ranked number one in healthcare in 2022 to 2023. So, really
That's
exciting.
so
And that
exciting.
is just fresh off the press. Um, I think one of the things that I really appreciate about SVP is there's kind of this nice balance between you have the corporate infrastructure without feeling like you're working in a really stuffy, rigid corporate environment. Like SVP to me, we use golden retrievers in a lot of our branding, and I feel like it really embodies kind of the SVP spirit where it's like it's moving fast. It's this puppy that's still kind of figuring out where it's going, but it's like high energy. It's got a good heart and like it will grow up and mature really well. I feel like we definitely are the golden retriever puppy of companies.
As someone who grew up with two golden retrievers, I completely understand that analogy, and that's so I mean, who doesn't love that? And I love that balance of, sometimes people want that safety net of a corporation and not necessarily just something that's mom and pop, which I mean, that's great too. But
Right.
sometimes you feel a little bit more secure having that corporate environment, but that doesn't always necessarily foster that culture that people I think are searching for more and more when it comes to work. Because let's face it, we spend most of our lives at work,
Yes.
and so you want to be in an environment that is supportive and healthy and stimulating. And so to kind of have that balance, that's really superb. So I can see why you did so well.
Yeah, yeah. I think it really does help to being led by doctors. They understand our hospital teams. Our three of our foremost doctors, leaders within the company, hospitals that they owned are currently part of the SVP network and served as the early model for what does this process look like as we acquire hospitals. And I think because of that, you inherently have more skin in the game as a company, right? You have
Mhm.
these people who not only are they practicing veterinarians, but their hospitals are part of this network. They've got a lot of skin in the game as a result, right? And I think because of that, SVP definitely has a lot of heart. And if I go to my boss and I tell him, hey, XYZ is happening, I feel like this is what's best for the hospital team. Um, I always get okay, what would that look like? And then as long as we can pave that way, it's a yes, right? Like whatever we need to do to best serve our hospitals, if I can articulate why we need to do it, how we will get there, I get a yes. And that's a really rewarding feeling as a leader, working for a corporation because you don't always get a yes, even if you can well articulate the why and the impact. And that's
That's
very
very
rewarding for me.
That's great. So, looking ahead, what are your hopes and goals for the future of the SBP Penn Foster partnership?
Get people through school, Nicole. 100%,
Enroll.
get them through. Um, no, actually, I should say 2 things. Get them through school and then help them be as impactful as they can be in the hospital. Those would be my top 2. It's like one thing to get someone through school, but now you have to pivot and say, "What do we do with you?" Right? Like, there have been, I think, a lot of misconceptions of vet techs over the years that well, a VA and a VT, they can practically do the same thing, but a vet assistant and a vet tech in most states, legally, there are definitions of what they can and cannot do, and they do differ. Um, and so I think part of this puzzle is really leaning into by state, what can you legally do here as a vet tech that you couldn't do as a VA? And how do we help you get there? Because you may have received all of that training as you were going through the Penn Foster program to learn these skills, but it doesn't mean that you've perfected them yet. So there's still a level of mentorship that has to happen because just because you learn something in school doesn't mean you're great at it. And so, a big part of this is getting folks through the program and then making sure they have the infrastructure and support in their hospital to take that learning, apply it in real life, hone their skill set, and feel like they're really accomplished in what they're doing and that they're adding value to the hospital.
That's superb. I mean, I mentioned I have pets, and I'm one of those people that's like, they're my babies, and it's true, they really are. So, this is a topic that's very near and dear to me, especially because, like I said, I grew up with animals my entire life. So I personally feel like I understand the importance and I really value, the strong education that these veterinary healthcare workers bring to the table. So I really, on a personal level, really
Yes.
appreciate the work that SVP does and, all of these vet techs and veterinarians, because it really is such important work because, I think there's a pretty strong consensus amongst, pet owners that they are our family. And like you mentioned earlier, we want to make sure they have the best care, that have the healthiest lives that they can. So we can have them for a long time to come. So thank
Yeah.
you so much for sharing information on SVP and how, employees can really expand their skills and continue to do meaningful work. So I really appreciate it. Thank
Yes.
you.
Thank you so much for having me, Nicole.
Thank you.
To learn more about Penn Foster's Veterinary Technician Associate Degree Program and how we can help you upskill your veterinary team, visit us online or contact us today.